Okay, I want to call to order this afternoon's portion of the meeting. So the first item of business, Suzanne, do you know who's supposed to be carrying load on the sales tax? That would be David. Okay. Mr. Lanik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dave Surtax, County Engineer. I'm going to be assisted by a few other folks, and we'll get to that in a second. But what we want to start with is really why we're here today, and the board direction that we received from a few of the board meetings the last couple months was to come back to the board with some information on if the board wishes to move forward with a sales tax for either pavement management or anything. What would be the process? What we could answer in terms of questions regarding process. So we had some major things that we needed to discuss in the public forum, and one of those was how do we engage the public? What's the difference between maintenance and reconstruction in terms of roadway projects? And if we were to move forward with a sales tax item, what would the project list look like? So we came back in August of about a month ago and talked about a ranking methodology for a project list. And we also asked, and the board also approved, that we move forward with a special meeting like today to talk about those things in more detail. So what we came in with is something for you. It's more of an informational process so that we can get the information to the board so the board can make a decision if we want to move forward with the sales tax initiative or not. And one of the key things we wanted to start with in our outline was the difference between these two surtaxes. One of them has come up recently. We've been talking a lot about the infrastructure surtax, but the transportation system surtax is relatively new, and we were asked to bring back information on that. Then we were going to go into the projects themselves and some definitions of whether what would constitute maintenance, what would constitute reconstruction, and what we might think could be projects in both of those categories. And those are really the major parts of the presentation. After that, you probably would get a little bit easier to go through the rest of it. But we want to definitely get some information from the board in terms of what they think the parameters of the initiative might be if they want to go forward with it, how we might want to go out to the community and share the information, and what the schedule might look like if we move forward from here. So with that, we want to start with the transportation system surtax versus the infrastructure surtax to begin the discussion, because we certainly need to nail down which of those two taxes the initiative would need. And with that, I'm going to get some help from Jeff Hayes from Growth Management and probably from the attorney's office as well. So I'll hand that over to Jeff.
Good afternoon, Mr. Hayes.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Solanic asked that we go over the difference between these two surtaxes that are allowed for in the Florida statutes and go over the differences between them, similarities and differences. I'll start with the Charter County. It's actually, the long title is the Charter County and Regional Transportation System Surtax. It used to be called the Charter County Transit Surtax. Over the last several years in the legislature, there's been changes to the statute that have broadened its application, and that's why in years past, we have not brought the staff has not brought this as an option in the county commission. But over the last several years, there's been a couple of updates to the statute that have allowed it to be used by Alachua County for some of these purposes. The first thing is it is up to a 1% surtax. It's up to 1 penny. It's not specified in the statute that it has to be in increments. It doesn't have to be a quarter, a half, 75, or a full penny. It can actually be anywhere in between. We're going to check with O&B to make sure they think that the Department of Revenue could actually handle it if you wanted to do 0.67 cents, but it is allowed in anywhere up to that 1%. It is levied countywide, and it would be a countywide referendum or a charter amendment. We just went through the charter amendment process here a year ago, but it could either be a charter amendment or just a countywide referendum. The ballot needs to include the term of the levy and the percentage. The funds are deposited into a trust fund, and the statute enumerates several uses for the proceeds that are listed here. One of the reasons that since this has been eligible for the county since 2009, the staff hadn't brought it to the commission as an option, was there is some language in the statute that deals with a 25% limitation on it being used for roads. As I mentioned formerly, it was strictly a transit surtax that was for transit capital and operating, and there's 2 counties that had levied it under the auspices of that, Dade and Duval. But since it has been opened up and under consultation with Mr. Wagner, the county attorney, it's pretty clear now that in the statute that it allows it to be used for any one of these uses in any percentage that's deemed per the county commission and per the ballot language on the referendum. So there's no limitation on whether it's used for capital or operating or whether it's used for roads or transit. All of that is up there. It is distributed directly to the county. The county has options to enter into interlocal agreements or to remit it to a transit agency or to put it towards county needs. And I have there the last thing, a question mark. Whether or not we would specify the projects in the ordinance. I think that has been the practice here in the past, and that's just something for the commission to consider as if they choose to move forward. So that completes the discussion of the Charter County Transportation System Surtax. This is the one we're more familiar with here. That's been levied at different times. The Local Government Infrastructure Surtax. It's either a 0.5 cent or 1%. It's also levied by countywide referendum. Once again, the ballot includes the term of the levy and the percentage. Its uses are strictly for capital type improvements for land. We've used it, of course, here for parks and conservation in the last couple of years. Since expired, but new capital facilities, design and engineering construction costs, the major type of projects that Dave's going to go into a little bit later in terms of roads, reconstruction or resurfacing, but not standard maintenance, not restriping, not that kind of operational type maintenance responsibilities. The distribution for this surtax is also a little bit different. It's one of the major differences. It's not of total county commission discretion. There's either an interlocal agreement that's entered into with the different municipalities, or there's a statutory formula that authors the split between the different municipalities. It's based on population. And once again, the ordinance, you could choose to either specify broad uses or specific projects. I can go into this or let Mr. Wagner go into this. It's just the ballot question requirements. It's 75 words for a ballot question, 15 words on the ballot title. It's got to be clear and unambiguous language. It cannot mislead the voter. It needs to state the general purpose of the measure. Obviously, it needs the attorney review. And I think Ms. Wagner would stress that these are often litigated, so it's very important that the county attorneys have reviewed it. And I guess one of the remedies is to ask the judge to remove the question from the ballot. I don't know if Mr. Wagner has anything else to say. In terms of timeline, this is a general timeline if the county commission wished to move forward with a referendum to advertise a hearing. We're basically talking about early June, and hopefully by the second meeting, at least in July, actually adopting an ordinance to place an item, either one of these, on the ballot if that's the wish of the county commission. At this point, through this presentation, the staff thought it would be good to offer some decision points to go through. Since we've described the 2 measures, our recommendation is option 1, which is the Charter County Regional Transportation Surtax. The main reason, one of the main reasons that's staff's recommendation is really twofold. One is that it's allowed for in the statute. It's specifically set out for transportation. So it's not competing with other capital needs of the county, future or otherwise. It's set out for transportation, and these are the main purpose that the board has pursued thus far. The pavement management program is a transportation use of the proceeds. The other is that the proceeds do come to the county, and the county can either enter into interlocal agreements or otherwise distribute those to municipalities as it deems fit, and that's another important option. Another part of that interlocal agreement or dealing with the different jurisdictions, different municipalities, is that some of the jurisdiction municipalities might want to use this money for other transportation purposes within their jurisdiction. And this offers the county to be able to enter into those uses via the interlocal agreement. So I'll stop right there, and we can entertain any questions about what we've covered so far, or move on.
Commissioner Long?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Certainly, this is the one that I've been advocating if we're going to use any of the options. It should use this because it specifically is geared toward all of the things that we talk about in transportation: road transportation, maintenance, resurfacing, also transportation as it relates to RTS, facilities, capital, and the needs. So to me, it has a much broader use. Some of the interesting features of this particular option also is there is no default state formula for distribution for revenues sharing. That's all left up basically to the county in terms of how the revenues will be shared. And one of the good things about this is you could, if you decide to do something, we can say, well, if the voters in certain cities vote for it, then here's your percentage. If you don't vote for it, you don't get it. And that way you can have an incentive for those cities who want to be engaged and use some of these proceeds for capital and for any other types of uses under the use for the facility. Now, I know that kind of sounds like, well, the bottom line is, let's think about this. Every time we've had one of these sales taxes, small cities never vote for them, but they always get the benefits of everybody else. So to me, I think the political will of the elected officials and the voters in communities should be, if you don't want to tax yourself for it, fine. But for those who do, they should benefit. So I mean, that's just me thinking and talking, but that's just me. I'm sure others probably have a different view on that. But I think if people don't want to tax themselves, they don't have to. But I think for those who, by majority, decide they want to, and if it passes, they should serve a benefit. But I think if you look at it, it serves all of the purposes for which we have talked about, resurfacing. I mean, if you look at it, it reads specifically for all the purposes that I've heard us discuss, whether it's, here's a funding source for Route 75, for example, for the county. And if we want to have an enhanced route, we can do that. Same thing for capital facilities for RTS and for any other capital facilities that we may deem or choose. The other thing is this particular funding source also can be bonded, which is another great opportunity that I think it gives to us. So I think if you're going to look at it, to me, it's all encompassing in terms of transportation. I think the local option sales tax is somewhat limited. And this particular option also allows you to pay for O&M costs as well. So, I mean, it's broad operation and maintenance costs. Well, to me, I'd rather hear other people's thoughts, but I'm just telling you, of the two, if we're going to consider putting before the voters for discussion in terms of transportation, most people have talked about roads and resurfacing transportation, whether it be RTS and others. This should be the option if we're going to do it. So, at the appropriate time, if we want to have something for discussion, I'll certainly put a motion on the floor, but I'd like to hear from everybody else options, and if the attorney has some other things he want to add, I'd rather hear that as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I still have yet to figure out all the specific details on how all this works, but I wanted to go ahead and at least share with the rest of the other commissioners and the folks out there what I perceive to be, number one, what I've heard most of what people are looking for, but number two, what's going to be best for the county. And as I see, one of the biggest problems we have in the county is the $400 million backlog in road maintenance, not RTS, not a bus rapid transit, and not a any other type of transportation issue. It's $400 million of pavement that needs to be replaced. And if we at least address that specifically, then we might be able to make some headway. And even then, it's going to be a little challenging to try and get the folks to go ahead and vote that in. And it's not because they don't believe in the $400 million backlog in road repair. It's that they're just concerned that the money generated from the tax will not be used as efficiently and effectively as they would wish it to. But that's the other criteria that we would try and figure out how to structure this surtax, is that what it's called? Through this referendum, put it on the ballot. Okay. All right, I'm getting there. And with as much detail as possible so that people would understand what specifically are they going to be voting for, and that they, again, will feel comfortable in that their money, their precious money, will be used adequately. So the bottom line, pretty simple. It should be, I'm even thinking, 1 full cent for pavement, maintenance, replacement. I'm not sure, Mr. Hendricks, what specifically that word is for pavement and resurfacing. And if I don't think that we can include in there, and I'm not sure if that's true or not, for capacity. And for those out there, I'm getting an understanding that capacity is to increase the number of lanes, turn lanes and all, whereas it can be included. So that's even a bigger bonus there as well, because there's just so many, and I think somebody's going to come up and help me a little bit with that, but I think we're in there. And even though right now our big issue is maintenance, the second biggest issue is capacity. And I think that's one of the main reasons why we have such a, I guess, traffic issue, which people are going ahead and making the recommendation that mass transportation is the only solution, whereas I honestly believe it's capacity issue, and you can't get there from here. So with a few extra roads and then with the maintenance of the roads. So I think that we could solve so much of our transportation, and I call transportation getting in my car and driving somewhere, whereas it's important to make sure that a lot of folks understand that when transportation is being used, that is another word for buses and for mass transit, not just automobiles and get in your vehicle getting from point A to point B. But I'm talking about actual transportation and automobiles. So my suggestion and my recommendation is that we put an initiative out there and let the people decide to vote on it or not for just road pavement, just for pavement for roads. Is that a clear way of saying what I think I want to try and say? And if we just go ahead and do that, then we'll have a greater opportunity to start solving our $400 million backlog problem that we must address sooner than later, because it's just going to get worse. Thank you.
Anyone else? Paul?
Well, I would like to see us pursue this as a potential dedicated funding source. So yes, I would support the what is this called again? The charter, the charter county transportation system surtax. I would support moving forward with a penny, because as I understand it would leave the entire penny sales tax if there were community initiatives, if people wanted to go get signatures for active recreation, conservation, or any multitude of other things that people identify in the community maybe need to be done. That would leave that entire penny out there available for those uses, and of course understanding that those also would go to a referendum if people did collect the signatures. So yes, I would support moving ahead with this. You know, I don't know whether the public will support 10 years or not, but I think that would be a reasonable time frame. And however, I think one of the things that appeals to me about this is the flexibility. And I would not support spending the entire penny necessarily on pavement, but I certainly myself would support expanding capacity if there are areas identified where capacity needs to be expanded. As I've said many, many times, I love my car. I love to drive, and But I also very much support, as you know, transit, especially in areas where we so desperately need it and where people depend on transit as their only mode of transportation. And I have historically supported all the multimodal choices that we have provided to our citizens. So if that clarifies, that's where I would stand on the issue, and I'd be happy also to put the motion on the floor just to move the process forward when the chair is ready. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Drummond, do you know, I know that there's something going on, there's a citizens initiative, on one of the I guess it's the Surtax. Are they trying to do this one?
They're talking about the Charter County one. That's correct. At least that's what I've been able to attend one of their meetings, and
So they're talking about number one?
they're talking about option number one.
Okay, so if they do that, that's a citizens petition that they're trying to do.
Mhm.
Is that correct?
I'm not sure how well that's progressing at this point, but many of them are on a trip to Oregon to
Right,
find out.
that's right. Well, Mike, before I go in there, do you want to say something about the two options between the surtax for the charter county and regional transportation, or the local government infrastructure surtax? Those are choices that are being presented to us.
Are we being asked to make a decision on those two today?
Well, Commissioner Long asked, kind of was trying to figure out where the individual commissioners stood on it, and so far, I think it's been Paula and Rodney have favored option one. Susan's more towards option two. So far,
I'm
I
sorry,
think that-
has staff already presented the differences between the two?
Yeah.
Okay, I apologize that I wasn't here for that. If you can just give me a minute, come back to me.
Okay.
And Mr. Chair, we definitely put this as a kind of a breaking point in the discussion. We are going to go through the rest of the presentation, discuss the various uses that staff is recommending for the county functions, and there's definitely obviously a lot of policy decisions for the five of you to make in terms of the length of time, the levy, et cetera. So we don't have to get stopped right here. We can come back to this as part of the rest of the discussion if it pleases the commission.
Well, I'll go ahead. I'll go ahead and tell you, if there's currently a group that's working on putting the option number one on there, I'd say let them have at it, and they can get the petitions, and we can go from there. I just want something to pass that'll help with the road system, and just being pragmatic. I think that there's going to be opposition. We've heard that there's opposition if we try to put capacity enhancing projects on there. I've heard that there's going to be opposition that if we put the RTS or multimodal issues on there. So from a practical standpoint, for something that actually passes, that could potentially pass, that would service both the RTS as well as road, as well as just regular vehicles, just something that would address the declining infrastructure for some finite period of time, seems like the most realistic way of approaching this, of something that's going to pass. And yes, one may be great. And trying to get more roads on there, that would be good too. But from a realistic standpoint, having done this once before, I know that creates heartburn in some part of the county. So we know that we have this huge problem out there as far as the declining nature of our infrastructure. So if we can just address that, which I think pretty much is universally accepted that it's an issue, I think it would have the best chance of success, and I even question, whether that'll pass in this environment. So I would be more in favor of option two and let the citizens work on option one. And as far as how much, we've heard that there are other initiatives potentially out there that people may be garnering. So if we put it at 1%, and that means that it won't pass or has less chance, then we ought to go for 0.5 cent. We ought to do everything that we can that increases the chances of making this something that will succeed. No. Mr. Hedrick.
Thank you, Chair Pinkerson.
And that got the lights going.
I really wasn't planning to comment too much about this, but I really would like to share a couple of thoughts, if I may. In the time I've been here, the one thing that has worried me greatly is the challenge of dealing with transportation issues in this community, knowing full well that their gas tax was not going to be was not a viable a revenue source to fund our transportation challenges, whether it's maintenance, whether it's capital capacity projects, which are included in the mobility plan. There are some capacity projects in there, and I also know there's a lot of interest in this community in some corridors or venues for more mass transit. The problem is, as we said the last time we talked, this is a nationwide problem. How do you fund transportation systems going forward? We're further limited in our community because to a large extent our tax base is not growing. It's not diversifying yet. I know that's become an objective that the commissions, not only the county commission, but the city commissions are working diligently on. And so I think that will improve, and certainly the things the university and area businesses are doing are moving in that direction as well, but that's going to take a long time. So the other thing is you deal with the psychology of the public. Is there how do you develop a revenue source that the public feels comfortable that they can trust and that will take care of the county's transportation infrastructure into the future? Today, our big need, of course, is maintenance. And that's our huge need. That's the elephant in the living room. Going forward, there are going to be some capacity initiatives. There will be opportunities, for example, like the 20th Avenue Bridge going over I-75, where we could possibly get the federal and state government to pay 80% of that cost if we can match it with 20% dollars. You know, where does that come from? But the biggest thing is the psychology of the public. The idea that in this community we could establish a surtax called a transportation surtax. That becomes a defined revenue source for dealing with the county's transportation infrastructure needs, not only today, but in the future. And it gives the county commission, the elected representatives of the citizens of this county, tremendous autonomy to make those decisions. You get to decide, do you want to only restrict it for pavement management, or do you want to add other things? Maybe not today, maybe later, but it at least gives you a viable funding source that not only solves our problem for today, but establishes in the mind of the resident, hey, there is light at the end of this tunnel. We really do have a way to fund transportation in our community, not only for today, but going into the future. The other thing that's been a real challenge in our community is working out agreements with the cities, especially in dealing in the city of Gainesville, which is what we've had to do in years past with the sales tax. And I still think we would have those discussions, and I still think agreements would have to be reached, but I can almost tell you without question, based on my experience, that the negotiations, in my opinion, would be more balanced by having the transportation surtax, because right now the leverage in many ways goes under the sales tax with the city. And finally, how many times I reflect upon the number of times we've talked in these meetings about the sales tax and found that in time and again it bogs down because it's competing for other capital needs in the community, and we can't get past, well, what other projects are competing for these dollars that need to go for transportation. The transportation system, and I'm finishing up, is like the plumbing of our house. It's like the roof of our house. It's like the foundation of our house that we know needs to be repaired. We know it needs to be addressed, but when we spend those dollars to fix our plumbing or fix our roof, we don't see aesthetic improvements to our home, and it's really hard sometimes to bite the bullet. It's far more easier to go out and paint our house or put a garden at our house or do whatever, because we can see those results. And transportation improvement projects oftentimes are just not sexy. And so that's why, again, it's very difficult for transportation projects to compete toe-to-toe with things like other kinds of projects that are competing for the sales tax dollar. Last thing I'll say is my neighbor, who is, I would say, one of my neighbors, but a number of my neighbors came up to me recently, and rarely do they do this, but I would say they are fiscal conservatives. And they came up to me and they said, you know, we've been following this transportation issue with the county commission. And they said, what a great opportunity for this community. Our economy is struggling. If we could pass this tax and get this money consolidated so that it's being respent in our community to fund these projects, not only does it fix our problem, but look at the shot in the arm for our economy. And I thought about that, and I thought, you know, that is a really strong message, and it's one that I think if we go forward with this initiative, that really needs to be talked about, because we get so focused on the trees, we're not thinking about how much this really could help our economy. And so it would benefit not only our taxes, but it benefits the people that get the jobs, but it benefits the restaurants and the grocery stores and everybody else. So that completes my remarks. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Hendrick. Mr. Drummond?
Just going back to the citizen effort that's out there, my experience with the group, even though they're struggling because they do represent a number of points of view, is that the initiative was launched to really focus on some of the transit. It's not solely transit. In the meeting that I attended, there was a number of presentations that listed all kinds of needs, including our pavement management needs. The only difference is if we just let that play its course and it comes to fruition, then we pretty much have what that group has gotten signatures for. Now, that might be saying something that the public, at least some portion of the public, may be in support of that, and hopefully that group will figure out a way to get its fingers on the pulse of the public to really understand what might be viable in terms of the voting, not just what they collectively want to see, because it's still a pretty small group of people. That's a distinction between county commission making a decision based on what you think the needs are versus an outside group trying to get signatures on a petition to move forward with something that they believe are the needs of the community. Just some thoughts.
Commissioner Long?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, the comments you made probably are the comments that one would argue that support option one, mainly because one of you got a group of people who are considering option one, and they can become partners that could help you do the things that government cannot do, raise money for public awareness. They could be the foot soldiers on the street that can certainly help educate the public about option one and the needs for transportation. And I think realistically, we have to understand that you're not going to be able to pass, I don't believe, a transportation tax in this community that is not multimodal. You're just not going to be able to do it. As much as I know the roads needs repairing, there are others going to support an initiative like this because it's multimodal. Now, I'm not saying we got to go out and build bike paths and those kinds of things. However, I think mass transit and RTS, bus rapid transit, and some of these other innovative things that people are talking about for the future have to be considered. But you can always craft it to where the lion's share of the revenues would go for the majority need, which is, resurfacing, pavement management, and those types of things. So, and then again, there's another option. You can, allow the citizens to go put this option on the ballot through the referendum process of collecting petitions, and you can put one out, and they'll cancel out each other. So, I think what we need to do here is we need to look at the opportunity that's best for all of us and try to negotiate with all the parties, including the governments, about how best to move forward with some of their needs as well. So, those are my comments.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Barley.
Our backup includes a description of the ordinance, which provides for the surtax, option 1, but it doesn't really summarize the differences, and I guess the county attorney did that at the beginning of this presentation. Okay, and I, again, apologize that I missed that. Could you briefly just summarize the differences between the two options?
Do we have that?
And I don't see it in my backup. If you can point it out to
It was
me,
up there.
but not in our backup.
No.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Jeff Hayes once again. The primary differences, first one being that it's up to 1 cent at any increment, up to 1 cent, instead of a half a cent or a penny. That's the first.
It's the surtax you're
This
referring
is the surtax. Yeah, I'm going to describe how the surtax is different than the infrastructure surtax. I think the second primary difference is that the funds come into a trust fund that's under the control of the county commission. This is for the charter county, once again, as opposed to the infrastructure sales tax, which is either an interlocal agreement that's entered into with all the municipalities, or the statutory formula that's in the statute based on population. Now, obviously, there's a policy call in terms of coordinating with all the different municipalities, or as many or as few as municipalities as the county wishes to, in terms of the charter county, in order to make it politically viable or via the electorate. But the base discretion comes to the county commission. And then I think the third, and probably one of the biggest ones, differences between the two, is that it can be used on operations and maintenance of both transit and of roadway infrastructure, roads, bridges, transit, for either capital and operations, and any slice that the commission and the voters elect to enact. So that's, I think of all of those three that I mentioned, that's probably the biggest one in terms of what makes this different than the infrastructure surtax. The other being that it doesn't compete directly with the other uses of the infrastructure sales tax, which are government buildings, parks, recreation, conservation, all of those things that we've done in this county in the past with that levy. This is separate and apart from that.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Just a couple of thoughts then. I don't have a strong opinion about option 1 or option 2. I do, however, believe that whatever we ultimately put in front of the voters should be a plan for multimodal transportation that allows for people to get around through a variety of options, which I think is not only important now, but it's going to be very much increasingly important over the next 20 or 30 years, which is really what we're doing here. This is a plan for the next 2 or 3 decades. And we need to make sure that the money is spent on our transportation system as a whole. I agree that far and away the highest priority is road maintenance. And the proposal, if the county is going to be involved in it, should reflect that. When I think of multimodal, the transit component, obviously, if we go with number 1, because the city is going to have to support it, and residents of the city are going to have to support it, or number 2. But if we go with number 2 and it doesn't have a transit component, the part of the road network, part of it that I do think is very important is that we do our roads in accordance with the county's corridor design manual. And that means at least 4 roads that are within the urban cluster. If we're going to do substantial reconstructive work, it needs to be have paved shoulders, which are all the reasons that many people have described, and our engineer always reminds us it's less about bike lanes than it is about cars. But there's no reason not to go ahead and have those facilities. Again, this is if it's in the urban cluster. and also sidewalks if they don't have them and their collectors are higher. I'm not talking about neighborhood roads. I'm not talking about roads outside the urban cluster. But if their collectors are arterials in their urban cluster, and we're going to go back through there and do some major reconstructive work, which is all we're going to do on that road for a long time, this is the time to make sure that we upgrade to include those options for people to get around on that road. That's going to help everyone in the long term, including the people who are driving their cars. We rarely get a chance to really sample public opinion here. This is what I believe, by the way. This is what I've just said is what I think. But I also think it reflects the desire of the community, because the community is going to have to vote on this and approve it. The recent exercise that we did, where under 250 people came in and participated in our budget process, had a pretty clear message to it in terms of what people think we ought to be doing with our transportation system. They pretty clearly think that we ought to be doing more to fund bicycle and sidewalk and transit opportunities. But you who've been on the commission for a while, everybody I think except Commissioner Baird, may remember that the MTPO paid for a professional survey of the community. I still have a copy of it back here. I'm going to go get it here when I finish speaking, which asked the public, and it was scientifically valid survey, phone survey, how they would like to spend their transportation dollars and what they'd like to change. And the community, as a result of that survey, was pretty clear in thinking that we should be spending substantially more on sidewalks and bicycle lanes and transit than we're currently doing. So if we care about people passing this, I've heard people come to the microphone and say the only thing people care about is maintaining existing roads, and I don't think that's true at all. My sense of what the community wants, and we're all listening to different constituencies, but every time we've had a chance to really get a sense of what a majority in the broader community thinks, when we're talking about our urbanized developed areas, there's a recognized need to make it possible for people to get around other than just their cars. So if we're going to put something in front of the public and we don't include those elements, I think it will fail, and I will not support putting it on the ballot. If people hold that point of view, I think they represent the minority, but they're certainly welcome to get together a group of a dozen people and get the signatures and put it on the ballot, because you can do that. A determined group of 10 people can get an item on this ballot. I know that firsthand. So if the board is going to be involved in it, I think it needs to reflect that priority, that we, in our urbanized, our developed areas, if we're going to upgrade our roads, they need to include bicycle and pedestrian facilities, and we need a component for transit. Option 2, if we go with that, I wouldn't support a full penny. I would support a half penny if the board decides to go that way. And again, I don't have a strong preference at this point. I'm still thinking about it. But half penny, I think, gives it a greater chance of succeeding, because I know there are other constituencies that want to do other things with this surtax in the future, and you're going to rope them out of the process right up front if we do that. Question for the attorney. If we, under either of these scenarios, to what extent, once the county commission adopts a project list and defines it, and then the voters approve it, what leeway does the board have to change it after the election?
To answer that question directly is, we can't adopt a project list that the voters are going to approve, because the statute only allows us to use 75 words for the ballot question. So what we've done in the past is we've had an ordinance that attaches the project list. The last time was the 2008 Wild Spaces, Public Places. I got that right. Ordinance where we had a parks list, and all the municipalities in the county had a fairly expansive list, so that there was some flexibility as we went down the road with changing, but it had to be one of the projects on the list. So to answer your question, we're not going to be able to specify the project list in the ballot question, because there's just not enough words. But there's one thing I did want to say, if I can, about this, and it kind of interacts with things you all have been saying. If there is a citizens initiative process that is going to be launched, and I've heard there is, with a focus on option number 1, which is a charter county and regional transportation system surtax, and the only surtax under this statute where substantial monies can be used for transit operations, and that's what I think is motivating that group of citizens, from what I've heard. If that process is initiated in December or January, eventually it comes to the county commission for a decision, just like the airboat curfew. Either the board adopts it, the ordinance, and puts it on the ballot, or the board adopts a resolution to put it on the ballot, because it's an ordinance initiative. It seems like the optimal situation for the county to be in at that point in time, if there's an agreement between the board and this citizen as it relates to the allocation of the monies and between the different uses, if there was an agreement, then Commissioner Long said something that is very important, is the state law now prohibits any campaigns by use of public funds for campaigns to basically inform and educate voters on the ballot initiative. Governments can't do that anymore, but private citizens can. So if there was an accommodation and came in through an initiative process, much like we did on the Alachua County Forever program, which was done the same way, an initiative ordinance, then the board adopted it, and after adopting the ordinance, the board adopted a bond ballot question, which was the revenue piece, to go in front of the voters, but it had all the support of the people who started the initiative. So whether or not there's a chance that the county could agree with this citizen initiative group on the components of option number one, I don't know. But if we go about it unilaterally, we risk having two different questions coming our way, which if that happens, there's a way we can handle that, but there's a possibility we could get two questions on the ballot. We could get a question for option one and a question for option two, and that might be too much to achieve success, too much tax on one ballot.
Let me try the first question I asked you from a little different tack. When we adopted the gas tax, the additional nickel gas tax a few years ago, the board was at that time striving to kind of lock in the work program. This is what we're going to do with the money. This is how we're going to allocate it. And we got a similar, presentation from you. One of the ways that we added some strength to it was that essentially we adopted an allocation formula, 75% for road maintenance, 15% for paving dirt roads, 10% for bike bed projects, which was an agreement. It was built into an agreement with the city, if memory serves. And so it could have been changed. It could be changed to this day, but it would require both parties to go back and change it. Is that correct?
That's correct. And the difference there is that when we adopted the additional 5-cent gas tax, we did it by supermajority vote of the board by ordinance, so there was no ballot question. What gets complicated is when the actual uses are specified in the ballot question, and those uses are more specific, then we have, or maybe they address some sort of an allocation between different uses. 50%, like in this case, it could be 50% for transit, 50% for pavement management, something to that effect. Then we really can't change that in the future because of the specificity of the ballot question. Because there was a ballot question, but in the gas tax example, there was not a ballot question. And we did use the interlocal also for the gas tax because the statute requires that there be a distribution interlocal.
And as you pointed out, 75 words is all you can put on the ballot question. Mm-hmm. What I'm trying to get a handle on is how can we reassure the public that what we tell them the money's going to be spent on is what it gets spent on. Now, we can pass a resolution, I know, but how easily can that be changed? Is that simply three members of the commission at any point in the future can just say, forget what we told the public,
No, you can't do that. The way we did the ordinance for wild spaces, public places, we had specific language in the ordinance where there was an exhibit to the ordinance that listed the parks projects. So that means that list could only be unilaterally changed by the county. At the same time, in the distribution interlocal with the city of Gainesville, we specified the allocation for the other half of the money, and I think we specified the project list too, but I'm not totally sure that. I'd have to go look at the interlocal. So there's a number of ways to tie that down. We haven't had a problem in the past with deviating from actually what the ordinance said.
Well,
There's been allegations that we did it, but we didn't do it.
and also what I think people really are going to want to know is that the public is going to want to be reassured that it doesn't get changed if they vote on it. So we can say we won't change it, but 2 years later there's an election and someone else comes in and everything can change, and then people are going to be unhappy if they start changing it. So what I'm asking is, are you saying that we could reference something in the ballot language such that if people vote for this attached project list, for example, language like that, we could nail down what the money can be spent
You can't
on?
attach a project list to the ballot question because the law is clear. The only thing you can put in front of the voters is the 75-word question.
All right. So what you're saying really is that there is no way to ensure that what it's actually done with the money is locked down.
Well, actually is how specific you want to be on actually. If you want to say, for example, we want to do option number 1 and we're going to use the money for pavement management for the county road system and transit services, and specify transit services to be the operation and maintenance cost of a countywide or of a regional transit system, meaning buses, specified buses, then we could not then take that money in the future and spend it on a rail system because we said we're going to spend it on buses.
Okay. And I was thinking more along the lines of if we pass a tax that is about, leaving aside transit for a second, just about roads, or if some portion of it is about roads. Okay, we've got this list here from staff that tells us this is what the priorities are. And we're going to talk a little bit about what we want to include in that if the board puts it on the ballot. How can we best ensure that future commissions will have to abide by the information materials that we make available to the public at the time of the ballot? If we circulate a project list, which we can, this is what we're going to build. How do we? I'm still not getting an answer to my question. I guess we can't
Because you
lock in
can't.
a project list.
Well, you really no, you not with the ballot question.
All right.
That's the answer. It's just not. There's not enough words.
But could you have an interlocal agreement with the county or the city of Gainesville and perhaps the other municipalities as well, wherein all the parties would have to agree to a change like we did with the gas tax?
Yes, basically. It depends on it depends on how we structure this thing. It's a county. This has got to be a county ordinance to impose these taxes as a general rule, and so the ordinance is going to specify the actual uses, and the ballot question is going to specify the uses because we have to say what kind of uses. The actual specificity of the project list can be unilaterally controlled or controlled by the county or controlled through an interlocal agreement. And that's what we've done in the past. But there's got to be some flexibility within those broad categories, if there's 2 categories. So, for example, if we knew, I'll give you an example. If we knew we only wanted to use if we wanted to put in the ballot question and specify the type of reconstruction that we could use the money on, like you could even put in accordance with the parameters of the corridor design manual, something like that, to the extent right-of-way was available to do that, then we couldn't deviate from that because that's a specific item. The more specifics we put in there, the quicker we run out of roads. So I think on the bond ballot question for Alachua County forever, we went through about 20 ballot questions trying to refine it.
Okay, but we could structure that kind of language into an interlocal agreement,
Yes.
which would essentially require all the parties involved to, and we could structure it so that we sign the interlocal agreement if it passes. I mean, how would that work? Or would we have to enter into the agreement before we put it on the ballot?
Well, we could put in the current option. Option number 2 requires an interlocal agreement unless we go with the population-based formula. It's more precise as it relates to uses to use the interlocal agreement, and as it relates to the distribution percentages to each municipality in the county. Option number 1
authorizes an interlocal agreement but does not mandate it if we want to provide the money to one of the municipalities. For example, if we wanted to enter into an interlocal agreement to provide some portion of the money to the city of Gainesville for the transit system, or not even to the city of Gainesville, it could be this use is going to be allocated pursuant to a transit system, if that's what you wanted to do.
Okay.
So I guess if the board decides what it wants to do, and then we find out what this citizen initiative is wanting to do, there may be some negotiations that can occur after the first of the year, because they're going on option one as well, and we might get to the point where both parties can agree, because that creates at least some momentum that somebody else other than the county is behind this initiative.
Okay, and I came in time to hear Commissioner Delaney speaking, and I guess I've heard Commissioner Long since then. Both of you are leaning towards supporting option one, the county commission putting it on the ballot, or waiting and allowing the citizens to put it on the ballot?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I didn't really address that, but I would be willing to move forward today with us doing it, and I'm happy to authorize the staff to go off and go to the meetings or engage the leadership with us on this, because, I have not been at any of the meetings. And part of the concern I had is bleeding over into MTPO, where we get into sunshine issues when you're doing transportation. So I didn't think it was probably appropriate necessarily for me and maybe us to actually go and participate, because I believe there are other elected officials involved. And but they might be happy if we're willing to move forward to actually know we would put it on the ballot if they wanted to go out and do some of the public outreach and help at the end in terms of raising money and that sort of thing, if they so desired to send information out to the public. And I just want to also comment, I agree with you that somehow, I know that we can't lock this in stone, but I think it's very important. If we've got, percent for this and a percent for that, and somebody in good faith votes because they really do believe these roads are going to be repaved or there's going to be some capacity added, and 2 years later, someone's turned the entire system into buses, or on the other side, someone thinks they're going to get enhanced service somewhere and they find out a couple of years later they're going to get some lanes instead. I think that that would probably have a very chilling effect on anybody voting. And so I don't know, I guess we need to dwell on this a little longer. It does seem to me, I know, having worked on a recreation initiative in the 90s, and then, although I wasn't involved directly, but with the initiative that was on in 04 and then in 08, as well as the courthouse, I think that part of the confidence people have had is that they have, in fact, been able to see what they think they're getting by supporting initiatives. And so, I don't know, I guess we need to continue to talk about how we would have that. I still actually like what we did with the gas tax, where we dedicated percentages, because that gives you the flexibility. Here's the road list. If the road prices double, we're still putting the same percentage of the tax into roads. Or if the cost goes down, we get more done. But from the beginning, if you have X amount come in, this percentage will go here and this percentage will go there. And I think the percentages we identified really did, there was a context of, obviously, sidewalks and bike lanes cost less than roads, and so you need a much bigger chunk for when you're doing miles of roads as opposed to miles of sidewalks. So, but I think I support the notes I made were that I support number one, A, because of the flexibility of use, and B, the fact that I stated into the record that it does leave the entire local option surtax, infrastructure surtax, for the public if there's initiatives out there to come forward, whether it be for a quarter, a half, or a whole cent. It does leave that option open for the public as the public identifies things that they would like to see their local governments invest in. So I think if we can put transportation over into something that really is for a transportation system, that leaves in the future, because we don't know what things are going to look like 5 or 10 years down the road with the way we're going now.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Pinkerson and Baird, you are both leaning towards the local government infrastructure, option 2, I should say,
Yes.
and the board putting it on or waiting for citizens to do it?
No, the board.
Okay. All right, thank you.
And I, the first one, I'm not going to support till I see if there's some sort of, you're talking about percentages, I'd need to see the percentage for it. I'd even consider it, because it needs to, if it is, I mean, we have certain needs currently that are being used for transportation. But, it would generate more money if it includes capacity enhancements such as the expansion on some of the bridges, which would be a good thing. Potentially I could be swayed, but even if you've got multimodal, they need a road to ride on, and so everybody benefits with option 2. So
buses are sitting in traffic, so is everybody else.
but at least it's not
Buses are in gridlock.
but it's not in a dangerous situation because the roads are falling apart. So, Commissioner Byerly.
And by the way, I guess it's probably not ready today, or we would have gotten it by now, but it may inform this discussion. I had asked staff several weeks ago to put together an analysis of how much the county actually spends on the different modes, roads, pedestrians, bicycle paths. Do we include transit? I can't remember if we include transit, if you're working on transit or not. But the point is to look at the percentage of all the transportation dollars that we spend, how much has gone into different modes, and to take a historical look at that. And also the amount of money that we've put into maintenance as opposed to new construction. And again, take a historical look and go back a couple of decades and get a sense of where we are. Because like our budget, a lot of stuff is flying around out there and a lot of claims have been made, but it always helps to have the actual numbers. And so if that's going to be ready within the next week or two, that might help us make a decision.
Okay.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
We are working on that. We were trying to get it for this meeting. He stepped out of the room, but we'll ask him when he comes back in as to when we'll be ready. And while I'm up here, I guess some of the questions you're asking are continuing through the program, or through our program here. We might be able to assist you in your decision-making process as we go through our presentation as well. So some of the projects you mentioned, we were going to go into detail on those projects themselves as to what staff recommends adding and taking away, and what constitutes the maintenance versus the reconstruction. So we did want to get into that discussion as well, if that's good with the board.
We hijacked it.
Oh, I'm sorry, I came in late. I thought you'd already made your presentation.
Okay, how much more? Because we still have another item to do.
A lot, no. It's up to the board, of course. But clearly, we did want to talk about what projects may be included in an initiative. And you did a very good job of explaining where you thought the projects needed to be from your perspectives. And we might be able to help just by explaining what they are a little bit more from staff's perspective. We came up with 4 basic categories, 3 with a sub of 2. You've got your new construction category, which everybody tends to know what that's all about. So we're going to take that off the list. Then you've got routine or operating maintenance, which is our pothole repair and that type of thing. That doesn't really play into the conversation either, so we're going to take that off. It really comes down to our capital maintenance and our reconstruction. And what we call capital maintenance, we call that 3R. It's resurfacing, restoration, and rehabilitation. And that particular nomenclature is defined by the federal government and by our state government. And we kind of show that on the next slide. It really is those things that preserve our roadway. It takes an existing road and brings it back up to its original intent. So for just an illustrative purpose, one of the roads we did that we consider a 3R is County Road 236, not the 236 we've been talking about recently. It's a road that we did that comes from I-75 toward 241. And it looked like 236 on the other side of I-75 does now. But as you see, it had all the signs of a road that needed to be repaired, and it was going into the base failure. So we felt a 3R project would look like that. What we want to show in terms of our 3R projects, there's 3 basic categories in terms of the type of work that would go into a 3R project. One of them is to extend the service life of the roadway, which includes milling and paving, repairing and renovating the roadway close to its original intent, and the process of restoring the roadway if something has damaged it. Also, another big topic included with 3R projects are safety modifications. That includes bringing the roadway back to its current design, safety modifications for crashes, Americans with Disabilities Act compliance, modifications to barriers and guardrail, widening the roadway or bridge lanes, adding shoulders, providing clear zone, upgrading pavement markings, adding or removing traffic signals and correcting skid hazards, replacing bridges if they're rated as insufficient. We consider upgrading the current access management requirements. So if you look at the one picture, you're adding center medians, or adding or extending auxiliary lanes. That would be the turn lanes, not through lanes, and other safety modifications. And the final category that we would include in 3R projects are operational type of characteristics for making sure we make modifications to those, where we're adding paved shoulders to those. We adjust roadway features, whether it be curbing or intersections. We provide non-vehicular transportation needs. We add turn lanes again. We replace the bridges that can't be widened economically. We upgrade railroad crossings. We do intersection modifications, remove parking lanes if need be, or add or upgrade transit stops. So again, it's a very comprehensive list of items that we would put into a 3R project. And again, it's based on the industry standard of what 3R is. Some of the key 3R projects we've done in the recent years are shown on the next couple of slides. Northwest 51st Street, that's near Buchholz. It connects 23rd Avenue to 39th Avenue, where we did signal modifications, we did ADA modifications, we added some bike laneage. We actually added a sidewalk on that one. 39th Avenue, same thing. We improved the roadway to take care of some drainage issues, and we modified the paved shoulder. And 53rd Avenue was our first big project when pavement management became refunded, and we added paved shoulders to that particular project as well. In terms of reconstruction, the basic difference is that we're actually changing the character of the roadway. It's a major change compared to our 3R project list. One of the key things of a reconstruction is you're adding capacity. And it's more than just a turn lane, it's actually a through lane. So what we're talking about in terms of changing the character, we may be going from rural, which has got swales, to more of an urban that has curb and gutter and all the other types of amenities, like the corridor design manual would show. Another major function of reconstruction is if, again, we're adding lanes. We're going from 2-lane to 4-lane. That would constitute a reconstruction as well. And finally, with this, this particular slide is messed up, but it goes from an unpaved to a paved condition. So again, the differences in cost are pretty amazing, but again, you're getting a lot more bang for your buck in terms of what it is. But you definitely want to consider reconstruction in those areas where you need to do it. And at this point, we did include a ranked project list in the backup. And on that ranked project list, I don't have it up here, but we're going to show, we would be able to answer any questions that the board has. But we also wanted to show, in terms of the list itself, there are certain columns that we wanted to highlight. The things that we include on this list are really 3R. The two projects that you see are the same basic project. It's Tower Road. They're in yellow on that first page. Those we wanted to highlight because those could be part of a reconstruction project if the board so chooses. We'll be coming to the board probably in November to talk about options for Tower Road. That the board has told us to move back and answer some questions, and we're going to bring those pieces of information back to the board so the board can make a decision on that. But in terms of the pavement management program, the numbers you see here are really relevant to that. It's not relevant to the reconstruction of Tower Road, it's really just relevant to pavement management. But we decided to include some columns that we would include in a typical 3R pavement management project, including any Americans with Disabilities Act corrections. Every project on our list has that. It's a federal requirement. We have to look at that. Any safety modifications, we look at that. So everyone would have a yes on that. Where we're correcting substandard lane widths, you'll see that most of the categories are standard, but there are some areas where our lane widths are a little too small, and we would like to correct those, part of the project. Adding paved shoulders, if there's an existing one, we just change it, we replace it. If there is no paved shoulders, both our comprehensive plan says we add paved shoulders, and we agree that adding paved shoulders is a good thing. And you'll see there in that column where we recommend where those need to be added. And finally, we have a column for adding sidewalks, and we did follow in much the vein that Commissioner Byerly, Mr. Chair, mentioned. We recommend adding sidewalks in these areas as part of the 3R project list. And finally, the cost is associated with all these added amenities. So what you see on the final column is the cost of the resurfacing project and any other modifications that might need to be required to finish the project. So what we like to do, we do have a kind of a dynamic project file. It's a spreadsheet if you did want to talk about adding or removing project amenities. But really the idea is to get you a general perspective of what the pavement management program might be if you move forward with the sales tax list. And if you have any questions related to any one of the projects, we're able and ready to answer any of those questions.
That's very nice, but that's a little bit
Okay,
too
moving on.
specific for today's discussion.
All right. So we also wanted to talk about there might be some other types of projects, as you mentioned, that would be or would not be included in a sales tax initiative. Staff really looked at the Tower Road area. And if back in 2006, if I can pick your brains a bit, those that have been on the commission for a while, there was a great deal of discussion on the Tower Road network. And if the board were to move forward with a very distinctively different design for Tower Road, what would that do to the network? And that area network is still today an issue in terms of capacity, in terms of the traffic loading. And we do have some high priority projects in the current mobility plan that might be useful in terms of putting on a ballot, like the Tower Road reconstruction or the bridge across I-75 on Southwest 20th Avenue, or the 8th Avenue to 61st Street connection that would take a lot of the traffic loading off of Tower Road, off of Newberry Road, where you could get a direct connection across the interstate. So those are the types of projects that might be included in a total project list if the commission wished to add capacity type projects. And clearly there's always the other category, the other which captures everything else, which would be operation and maintenance of roadways, operation and maintenance of transit, operation and maintenance of of stations, those types of things. So there's that discussion that could be had as well. And again, that's kind of where we are in terms of our projects. And you've also talked, and I'm moving quickly, you've also talked really about setting the parameters again. You moved into it, but I did want to show this, this chart again. I've showed it before, but it basically, what you're going to see is if you used the tax that we've been talking about, the infrastructure tax, and you pass it at either the half cent or the full cent, you'll see the conditions. If no change is made, you would see an increase of around $70 million over the next 15 or so years in our backlog. If you did pass the infrastructure surtax at a half cent, you would get pretty much a defer of the problem over the next 15 years. And if you pass the full cent of the infrastructure, and I'll talk about the difference between the two, the infrastructure, you would start to address the need over the next 15 years. If you passed the transportation surtax, you get to set what the splits are. So really, it's up to policy to be able to determine what that is. Through the infrastructure, you get about half of whatever is passed for the county to use. In terms of the transportation one, you can set that split like you were saying. So again, if you get a full penny on the transportation surtax and you split it the same way, it would be the same thing. If you did want to change it where you got all of the money for the county and none was shared within the municipalities, it'd be basically double what you see here. So you could probably, what I'm suggesting is if you passed a half-cent transportation and only kept it for the county, you'd get the green line. So that's kind of the point, is there's a difference in terms of how the money can be distributed because the county controls that. And obviously you have to make it palatable for the voters, but that's clearly the difference I wanted to point out. So again, you have two different types of questions that have to be answered, and you've all weighed in on those questions. The what's the rate, half cent, 1 cent, or some other form? If you use the transportation surtax, you can possibly set something other than half or full. And then the length of time for the initiative. And again, you can see our recommendation at the bottom based on what we see as the need. We talked a bit about how we might engage the community. And we truly believe that as staff, if we work staff to staff with the communities, we could get a presentation for those elected officials that the staffs can bring and come to some agreement. So we feel at the staff levels, we can probably put something together that might be palatable for each of the community's represented officials. At the same time, we'd be looking for those public leaders, as you suggested earlier. And we do encourage developing some type of a project list that the community can look at and feel and be comfortable with that that's going to be the list. Obviously, we want to certainly provide accurate information as we go. The timeline is very short. So again, decisions now are going to pay dividends coming into the future. Clearly, the community meetings need to start as quickly as the board chooses. If the board chooses to go forward, we need to get out there and start talking with staffs and start getting leaders to talk to the community. We certainly believe that getting a project list together by January makes the most sense. That means you still have to get the list out to the public and make sure that it's going to be part of the movement forward. And we need to have all of the elected bodies approve and or endorse this list by March so that we can have the interlocal agreements, if necessary, signed. And then the draft ordinance needs to be in a draft form for the board to see by May so we can have it into the board's system. The latest is July, and obviously over the past few years there's only been one July meeting, so that's kind of the timeline. So it's very short and intensive. So again, finalizing with the recommendation, it's much like what you've been saying. We're asking that that you look into endorsing moving forward with a ballot item for a 1 cent charter county transportation system surtax. We'd like it to go for at least 10 years so we can begin to address the real need of the transportation system. And we would also like you to move us to begin the process of public engagement, including working with the staffs of the municipalities.
Okay, any questions?
Move the staff recommendation.
Which is?
Direct staff to proceed. I'll move that we direct staff to proceed with the development of a 2012 ballot initiative for a 1 cent charter county transportation system surtax for a period of at least 10 years and to begin the community involvement process.
Have a motion and a second. Discussion from the board. Commissioner Baird.
Even after sitting here for this time and listening to this and having heard some other presentations on this initiative, it's still very confusing. I thought I knew, and now after today, I definitely know I don't know, which is even worse. And if I don't know, and I'm sitting here, I can't even imagine what the real answer is and how anybody else out there is going to figure this one out as well. And one of the one of my big concerns with this charter county and regional transportation system, which is an RTS type of a program, a transit system. I had seen previously, I think it was, the initiative from the citizens. Wasn't that in our backup with the presentation about the RTS program? When we had that whole discussion of the funding of the RTS, the route, and the increase in rate, et cetera. We had that presentation. It was provided to us. This sheet was also attached to that, and I have it in my computer as well. And attached to this sheet of the 212.055-1, Charter County and Regional Transportation System, Surtax, was a description of the projects that were going to be done with that initiative. Is that what anybody else has seen, or was I the only one privy to that?
From the citizen initiative?
Yeah.
As our staff, I'm going to look around, is our staff generated, or have we been provided with that at any point?
I know what that is.
Oh.
Help us out.
That's the, at the, last time we discussed the sales surtax at the meeting, Commissioner Long asked for a copy of the statute. There was a
Right.
new provision, paren 1. So I transmitted to the board a copy of 212.055, paren 1, which addresses the Charter County and Regional Transportation surtax. It doesn't say, it's just a statutory language. What you have is the parameters of what we can do, not what's proposed.
Right. The attachments that I received were part of last month's discussion with the city that that was talking about, and for some reason why it was attached to all that, I'm not really sure. But in there, it was a whole discussion that we had with the city about our rates and all this. Attached to that was this particular charter language. In conjunction and added on to that was the proposal that I had seen that had enhanced service.
Mr. Chair, I think I know what Commissioner Baird is referring to.
Our joint
The
city
city
county.
had commissioned RTS staff probably a year ago to develop a premium transit system master plan, basically. And I think that's probably what it was, because it included increased local service, BRT. It was basically anything that had been discussed in the community over the last 5 years in total.
In a trolley.
And a
And
trolley.
streetcar, BRT,
Desire.
even some of our BRT routes that were we were referencing far out in the future. It was basic, if you wanted to say it was the wish list, it would have been anything that would even be conceivable under any circumstance.
Right, over a 20-year period.
So their staff directed, and I think it might have been in the joint commission meeting with the city, that might have been part of the backup.
Right.
And that list, probably this group that has been meeting, that kind of makes the largest project list that you could pick from in terms of certain, especially transit improvements. So it wasn't that list, I don't think, has been discussed as any local government could fund that, but this is the ultimate to choose from in terms of a system.
And
Right.
Mr. Chair, it's not presented as a plan. It's just really, here's all the potential projects. So
Right.
I
And
don't think
that
it's, I don't think it's
could
been attached to anybody's initiative yet at all.
Well, we received that with this particular information, and to me, that was the extreme end of the spectrum that could be done with this particular type of initiative. Is that true?
I'd have to remember even looking at the there's no way that there's any funding source that's available to this local community that could fund that system in
The
total.
1 cent, right, because the 1 cent
3
full
cents
would
would
be
do it.
$400 million. Right, for 20 years. So 20 years would be,
If you levied 1 cent for 30 years over that time period, you might be able to
think it's
fund
30.
some portion of those projects. I mean, I haven't looked at the total build out of it, but That's certainly nothing county staff is presenting as.
Well, I want to look at what
Proposal.
extremes and what are the possibilities, because we just, don't know where it's going to go. Again, one of the big concerns that I have, and well, not even concern, the bottom line is that we're $400 million behind in pavement, in road pavement. And we are very far behind also in capacity in a number of different roads. And when you go ahead and incorporate the regional transit system, well, at what level could that be used, that tax money, for that particular use as opposed to pavements? Because I think the big thing that everybody can agree on is that the roads need to be maintained, and we need to make sure that the monies are going to be used for that and not for anything else. At least that's when you can maybe even get your agreement, because everybody could agree on that. Because now as you start saying, well, maybe we'll use it for this, maybe we'll use it for that, we have the option, we have the flexibility, and that's when the big concerns start rising and saying, no, we don't want any more for that particular aspect of it. We want to go ahead and start, because we have to start addressing those.
Mr. Chair, I think one of the things that staff's recommendation does here, it allows the county staff to get together with all the municipalities and this third-party citizens group, which is members of the Chamber of Commerce, University of Florida, Shands, Santa Fe College, a very broad-based group. But in order to come back with something that that the county commission can accept, that hopefully a third-party group can accept, and all the municipalities could accept, that's something where there's only one item on the ballot. I think that was one of the key things coming from the manager, was not to have competing initiatives on the ballot. And to the extent, we've heard a broad range of things from the commission and certainly from the community at large, but hopefully through this process, and really the county commission in the end is in the driver's seat in terms of unless this group goes forward with their own citizen initiative, but to the extent that there could be a meeting of the minds, that's the ultimate outcome, I think, in terms of us getting any money for our pavement management program. Because the fear from staff is if we have competing initiatives, one that's just for transit that a community group, or primarily transit, a community group wants on, and just one from the county commission that's purely pavement management, that's not the best. It's hard to educate the public as to why they would vote for either of those, and it kind of splits the constituency. So I mean, that gets into some policy questions, but that's why we're coming forward with this recommendation.
So, Mr. Chair, can I ask the question? Because when I look at that slide that's up there, the way I would read that slide, based on what's on the slide, is direct staff proceed with the development of a 2012 ballot initiative for the 1 cent Charter County Transportation System Surtax for only pavement management program uses. And I heard you say something differently, so I think it means to be clarified that you're going to talk to everybody about all the authorized uses, transit, all the authorized uses, pavement management program, the whole thing. Because when I looked at that, it looked to me like, because the whole presentation here today was about the pavement management system. So it's important that the board understand that that you need to clarify that motion to say all the uses authorized on under paren 1 are fair game for the discussions, because I've heard different opinions from different commissioners up here.
Mr. Chair, I think I can clear up what staff's trying to present in this recommendation. It's very clear to the county staff what the county commission's premier priority is, and the two items that Mr. Surlanik mentioned, I mean, bullet one, pavement management projects is the primary focus, and that's why we're even before you today, because those were the directions the county commission has given staff all along. Number two is an issue that we were bringing to the commission in terms of some capacity projects, which are very high on our mobility plan list, that if they could be funded out of this, that would be a very a good use of the county, and would probably help some of the passage in terms of there's a lot of vehicles who vote with their wheels every day over 20th Avenue. But to get to the attorney's question, if we're going to be discussing this with City of Gainesville or City of Alachua or any of these other municipalities, they might have other ideas. So we need to take direction from the commission in terms of whatever percentage would go to the municipalities. But we're not the county's BRT system and some of these other things, the mobility plan, we're not proposing any funding for those out of this funding source. That's why we had the multimodal transportation mitigation program that we adopted last year, was to fund a lot of the capital and some of the operations of that system.
Would you be able to put that in writing?
You got lots of other people.
It will certainly be in writing, because whatever ordinance is adopted will have all of that information. I mean, I feel like I got clear guidance, Mr. Chair, that there would be a project list, or at least a percentage split in terms of uses.
Okay. Do you conclude? Okay. Commissioner Delaney, did you said something earlier? Do you need to say more?
Sure.
Okay. All right. Go ahead.
Let Commissioner Delaney's.
Okay, Commissioner Delaney. Actually,
Okay.
it's Commissioner
I
Byerly.
think it's Commissioner Byerly next.
Go ahead.
I'm passing something down to you all, by the way. That's the survey I just mentioned, which to my knowledge is the only actual scientific survey we've ever done asking our citizens how they want to spend the money.
In 2005.
Yeah, and I apologize. It has got a few of my editorial marks on there, but nothing too embarrassing. Yeah, it's 2005, but I don't think it's substantially changed in terms of the sentiment in the community about things. You're welcome to disagree if you want, Commissioner Baird, but I can tell you this right now. If you think that everyone would agree that the only thing we need to spend money on is maintaining roads, you're going to learn otherwise if you put that on the ballot. We just had that on the ballot, okay, not too many years ago, and it failed primarily outside the city, which is where the bulk of that kind of benefit would lie. What I don't think you're grasping is that the city of Gainesville voters, people in the city, more than half the county, don't benefit that much from the type of program, for the type of repairs you're talking about. Okay, they drive around town primarily, and their roads are not that bad. The county's responsible for most of them, and they're in pretty good shape. It's mostly the stuff out in the rural part of the county that's crumbling and falling apart. So if you think you can just pave these rural roads that carry 5,000 cars a day and put that in front of the voters and they're going to approve it, my opinion is you're in for a wake-up call. And the whole county has to approve this. So we have to include a mix that offers something for everyone. And people in the city of Gainesville and in our small cities around the county, relative to the rest of the county, disproportionately do walk a lot and do bike a lot and do use the buses and recognize the need for that, if not for themselves and for their neighbors. And they recognize the value of kids being able to walk to school and old people being able to get around and visit their friends and neighbors without having to drive their car. It's a benefit. Now, I think it's important that we keep the relative amounts in our minds. I do believe everyone agrees, and that survey indicates that the top priority for people is maintaining existing pavement. That doesn't mean it's the only priority. It means it's the top priority, and I'm going to support some kind of program that prioritizes that, but that also recognizes that we have a mixed bag of needs in the community. So again, if we want the whole county to support this, putting all the money in one use is a guaranteed way for it to fail. That's my opinion. A question for staff. The project list doesn't really specify which type of project these are. And a lot of the paved shoulder and sidewalk projects say no. And I guess what I would like to know is, and you're not going to be able to answer this on the fly today, is I'm going to want to know why. At least for those projects that are in the urban cluster. I'm not asking for that personally outside the urban cluster, but in the places where you've got a density of population and a lot of people in the city, if we're going to repair a road, I'd like to know the reason why we're not going to take that opportunity to add a bike lane, and if there's no sidewalk at all present, why we're not adding at least one sidewalk. So while this process moves along, is that something you can put together before the board is asked to make a final vote?
Yes, I'll talk with Brian.
Okay. Are all the ones that say paved shoulder, is it your intention when you add a paved shoulder to designate them as bicycle lanes?
We would determine that based on the urban cluster. We would definitely try to put bicycle lanes in there.
I should have qualified inside the urban cluster. Is it your intention to make all the ones that are at least 4 feet wide, paved shoulders, go ahead and designate them as bike lanes?
Right. The relative cost is minimal.
Right. Okay. So when this, I'm assuming if we vote for the motion on the floor, it's that's going to happen, and you're going to go out and you're going to talk to staff and you're going to come up with some more detail, and at some point it's going to come back to the county commissioner for a final vote.
For a recommendation based on everything we've talked about today, and that's what I was going to mention, it would be we would come back with a recommendation within the timeline that we've set out there. Hopefully be able to bring to you this grand coalition of all of the entities and how to get there from here. Do we need an interlocal agreement that spells out some of the specific projects? Should we do it like we did with the Wild Spaces Public Places, where everybody in the county adopted a project list? Now, sure, you could go back in and amend that project list, but the project list was pretty extensive, and we've shown that every one of the communities has spent the Wild Spaces Public Places money only on projects in that list where they've spent the money to date. And then recommendations as to, for the ballot initiative, whether to put in or the percentage split or whatever it is, based on the outcome of all of the public meetings and things that we're having. So that's what I anticipate we would be bringing back at some time within that time frame. Because deliberately, this is a broad motion. I know it's under the label of pavement management because that's our primary focus. If you go to that list of 3 bullets, it would be, in a sense, the 3 bullets that Jeff just showed you, identifying what we would recommend as the project list. Not that we would do everything on the project list, but it would be confined to that project list from all of the players, and then probably a recommendation as to what the split would be that would go on the ballot initiative, and then have that discussion here in public hearing process.
So if we wanted to enter into an interlocal agreement with the cities and include in that interlocal some language regarding conformance to the corridor design manual, would that agreement and to that level of specificity come back to us when we vote? Or will we already have an agreement? Because I got to tell you, before we vote, that's the kind of thing I want to see.
Yeah. Well, if that's the direction we get from the board, I mean, we'll be back in front of the board several times before the final decision is made. But if that's the direction of the board, to have the specificity spelled out in those agreements before we go to the ballot initiative, we may be looking at 2014, but that's another decision. Because
Well,
some of the negotiation of those interlocal agreements might be lengthy.
Are we going to have any? Do you propose that we have any interlocal agreement unless the board directs you so to?
We did before.
We have to with the sales tax.
We'll come back with a recommendation based on what we find, and one of the interesting positives, but it also lays more at your table of this, is that you don't need an interlocal agreement. I understand why Commissioner Biley might be looking for an interlocal agreement in terms of that's one mechanism we have for specificity, that there's at least 2 players would have to agree to change it. I understand that. And I think as of right now, I don't know the answer to that. A lot of it comes down to what we find out when we talk to the cities, when we speak to the citizens group out there and see if there's a meeting of the minds. We can come back and say, here's a consensus that we think will go forward, and it will require, or we recommend, that you enter into a interlocal agreement with these entities in order to lock it down, or we recommend that you adopt an ordinance that specifies what the project list will be limited to in terms of how we move forward on that. So I don't have the answer to that right now, but those are the possibilities that are out there.
Okay. Briefly, we still have the budget to discuss.
I know, Chair Pickison, and I think I'm about ready to drive you crazy, but Randy told me before he left, I know how you're looking at this. Randy told me before he left that
OB Manager Reed.
I'm sorry.
For the benefit of the public, you're talking about.
I
amendment.
apologize.
Okay.
I'm sorry. That was a stream of consciousness.
Understood.
Manager Reed said before he left, he pretty much told me that he wanted me to express my views to you about this issue. So, at the risk of my whatever, I'm going to do that. I had envisioned, I've been involved in a number of referenda over the years, not that many here. But in my experience, I've never seen one pass that did not have the unanimous support of the governing body. Now, that's not to say that it won't, but I've never seen one pass that didn't have the unanimous support. The second thing is that I've learned in Florida, in watching them very closely, that the referenda that have passed for capital projects have been those that were pretty much locked down to specifics, that the public knew when they voted that was what was going to be built, that there was a time, or if it was to build capital projects, that was what was going to be built, and they understood the time frame that it was going to be built within reason. Courthouse, I think, was a good example of that. I've also observed many of these discussions, and I observe pretty closely your discussions. And frankly, it's going to be impossible for all of you to reach an agreement where you're going to be totally happy with the decision. So if we're going to get a unanimous vote that has a chance of passing, it's going to require compromise on the part of the county commission. And if we get bogged down on this discussion such that we can't reach compromise, then, and it ends up getting voted on a split vote, my guess is it will fail. I've repeated myself, but coming back at a different direction. I had envisioned, the other thing I've noticed and kind of think that in the wild spaces public spaces public places was a good example. And the initiative in 2004, before that, we reached out to the communities and came back with a list of projects that we thought represented a broad consensus of the public. Now, I do think that the hurricanes, there were a lot of events beyond everyone's control.
That was Better Parks, Better Roads.
I'm sorry, that was Better Parks, Better Roads. That one went down. I think the hurricanes had a lot to do with it. Wild Spaces, Public Places passed in very difficult economic times. To me, common sense says that we will reach out to the city of Gainesville and to Alachua and to High Springs and the other cities, and we'll craft a project list. Now, one of the advantages of this approach, if I may, Chair Pinkerton, one of the advantages of this approach is it gives us latitude to work with those communities to come back with a project list that they can get excited about. Now, I remember a cartoon years ago when President Reagan was president, and the cartoon was a parade, and President Reagan was leading the parade. And one of the persons in the back of the line in the parade said, "I don't know where he's leading us, but I don't know where he's taking us, but I like the way he leads." So what I'm suggesting to you, and at some risk to myself by getting into this line of discussion, what I am suggesting
Not really.
to
We
you
don't
is-
hire and fire you, Rick. You're okay.
what I'm suggesting to you is that you're going to have to reach compromise. Give us the ability to go out and reach out to the communities and come back to you with a project list that people can get excited about. When President Carter was president, the country was in a malaise. That's not a political statement. It was. Reagan came into office. This is not a political statement. But his leadership and his positive can-do attitude of we can make this happen made a difference in this country. And I am suggesting to you that as a county commission, if you will unite and provide leadership and reach compromise and let us work with community to do the same thing, we can pass this thing. So that's the end of my remarks, and that's my position.
We appreciate it, Rick. Okay, Commissioner Delaney?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Hedrick, for your comments. I'm actually going to modify, because the motion I put on the floor was off the white sheet, and so I do want to modify the motion that I originally made that ended at, and when you said a period of at least 10 years and to begin the community involvement process, I want to change that to begin the community involvement process, discussions with the City of Gainesville and staff and the other small cities. We'll do it in that order: the City of Gainesville, the other small cities, and the community, and begin the community involvement process. And I think that's important because I know, for example, that over the last 15 years or so, we've had two of the small cities, Archer and the City of Alachua, working very hard to get some sort of a transit shuttle back and forth from their communities into Gainesville and back. And so that may in fact be a high priority for some of the small cities if they think that's important. So I don't think we should preclude from the beginning any of the initiatives that the smaller cities may want to take. And I also wanted to say that one of the projects that we've implemented in the last 5 or 6 years, the traffic signalization, I was very, very skeptical about. I'd seen it working in cities that have a lot of one-way streets, but I was very skeptical. And as someone who drives all over the place, I can tell you, having that system in place has made a huge difference without us adding road capacity to the corridors it serves. The other thing is, I remember some of the discussions, for example, about Tower Road, that that we know we need to do improvements out there. We know it needs, I'm sure, repave, resurface, but what I really remember is that the problem there is at the intersections, that the capacity itself is not necessarily the issue, it's the capacity at the intersections. And so in some places, increasing capacity isn't necessarily slapping a whole bunch of more lanes out on the side of the road. It's going in there and fixing the things that keep the traffic flowing when it needs to be flowing. So I would hope that we would be open-minded. I would hope that we would all support this moving forward. I think there's plenty of room for discussion with the public, with the folks working on this from a private initiative standpoint, as well as our small communities, because I believe that they all have their own list and their own opinions, and that even though we don't necessarily have to have an interlocal with them, to the extent that we can come to some agreement with what those projects are, I think it does give us strength if we go to the public and people in this community see, gosh, if we support this, here's this menu of things. You know, some number of these things are going to happen, not necessarily in the order that they're listed, but if the money is there, this is the menu of projects that will be implemented in my community. So I think that's important, and I would respectfully request that everybody vote for this today to move it forward. There will be plenty of opportunities for us to not support it in the future if we just simply don't like the direction the discussion is going. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Mr. Hayes, may I ask you one question? And then, did I hear you say that that our portion, whatever it is just going to go towards road maintenance, and it's not going towards that the multimodal is going to take care of the transportation portion of it, but our portion will address roads? Because I'll support this, because I'm not going to go into home rule. You know, if the cities want to do something with their money, that's their prerogative. And the people in that, but if what I heard you say earlier was it was going to road maintenance and road capacity issues.
Mr. Chair, yes, and you know, obviously the county, in terms of strictly the county's portion of whatever comes towards the county commission's way, it's going to be the county commission's discretion. And our proposal before you is to not include the BRT system within the county, with only one caveat I'll give is I know that the city's prime BRT corridor is the one that goes up to Santa Fe College, to the mall, the Premier. That's the only caveat. We're not proposing that, but if it works into some system where we can get federal funds to get it all, I mean, that's the only thing I would lay out there. But In terms of the other system, we are, with the TODs that are coming in and those other projects, we're not proposing that. We're proposing to put that money towards pavement management and maybe those capacity projects if the commission agrees.
Okay. All right. So it's going towards road maintenance is what I'm hearing, with the exception of perhaps Santa Fe, the BRT, which is probably the road improvement on 83rd.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. And the only other thing is that, and Commissioner Long brought it up, but if the commission wanted to substitute what it's currently taking from gas tax and funding with RTS and keep that money in gas tax for roads or other things, I mean, that would be something that the commission could discuss, but that's just switching money from one source to another, but not really new money towards either of those.
Okay, so I will support this, but it's based upon what you just said. So if it comes back and it's different, then we're done. Commissioner Byerly?
It is not unanimous.
Well, excuse me, I'm done.
On the assumption that the city is going to seriously address transit with its share, which I think is their intention if we adopt this, the full 1 cent transportation surtax, I can support that as well. With this understanding, projects that are in the urban cluster and for which the county is responsible for maintenance need to be done according to the corridor design manual insofar as the inclusion of paved shoulders and sidewalks. Now, the corridor design manual, memory serves, makes allowance for not having sidewalks when it's not technically feasible, or some kind of language to that effect. So, for instance, 23rd Avenue, 16th Avenue, where if we had an issue where there was a retention wall and we can't build a sidewalk, or it would involve a taking of private property, that's obviously not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about if we have right-of-way capacity, the road projects for which the county is responsible within the urban cluster, if they're going to be rebuilt, or if there's substantial maintenance, and I need to get with you to understand how you define those things because I'm still not crystal clear. If we're not going to spend any of this money on transit, then 1 to 2% of the money on sidewalks is not too much, in my opinion, and that's what we're talking about. And I guess if you're able to kind of quantify that, either now or when the time comes, you're already going to come back and let us know how much we've spent on sidewalks and bike paths. That's coming. But this project list, if you can give us a sense of what I'm asking for, what that would represent in terms of the total. Because my assumption is it's down there around 2%, tiny, probably less than the fraction of people in the urban cluster who actually walk. I mean, I bet pedestrian use will not even get its fair share, according to what I'm asking. So, Mr. Chair, that's what I'm going to insist on. And if we're just going to slap down asphalt on these roads and lose a 30-year opportunity to build the community I think we need to be focused on building, then I'm prepared to let the citizens put their own initiative on the ballot as well.
You just asked pertinent questions as far as asking for costs. That's appropriate.
Mr. Chair, if I may, Richard Hedrick, Director of Public Work, in the interest of facilitating the discussion and knowing the personality of the commission, I had envisioned.
What the heck does that mean?
Just listening to your different discussions and
If
how
you really knew that, he wouldn't be standing up there right now.
I think I understand you, Commission, pretty well. So, anyway, here's what I would
Maybe we made an
suggest.
exception at hire and firing thing I was talking about earlier.
I understand. That's okay, too. I'm getting closer to that retirement date every day. And that's a good thing. That's not a good thing. I guess we'll see. As long as my name's not in the obituary column, it'll be all right. Here's the thing. What I would suggest, and the way I had envisioned approaching this, is that because I do know the issue with sidewalks, no sidewalks, so forth, there's some debate about that, is we'll bring the list of projects, and as with each project, we would define what that project represents. Because I do suspect there will be some roadways along the way where you're going to want to have enhancements in there, where the community that lives is going to want those enhancements. We've had that experience, like with 16th Avenue. And there are going to be some where that's probably not the way the community would necessarily want it, and it's like 91st is a good example of that one. So I would say we'll bring the list with you, and we'll define the parameters of each project. Again, that way you know and the public knows what they're going to be voting on. Is that
Okay, thank you.
And if I may,
Yeah,
can
sure.
you, and will a part of that be, can you include a rough estimate of what the total fraction would be for
sure?
pavement maintenance as opposed to sidewalks? Again, I'd like that fraction that we're talking about spending out there, because I don't think it's very much.
Yes, sir.
Rodney? Roll light. Okay. Okay, motion's out there. Anybody who would like to speak to it, this would be the time.
Well, Mr. Chair, actually, I'd like the motion to kind of be modified a little bit from what it originally is if we're going to proceed, because I'd like to have some language in there spelling out what the discussion I just had with staff.
Okay. That was the motion that was made and seconded.
Okay, I'll work on a little language here. I'll
Okay.
take comment.
Ms. Nelson, thank you for your perseverance today.
No, thank you. Are you going to fall asleep? Don't
No.
start me. Bruce Nelson, Alachua County, lickety split. When Commissioner Long stated earlier that if the people in the city didn't vote for it, then they don't get none of it. Mr. Chair, I would like to ask Commissioner Long when I finish if that means with the new changes to the county charter, okay, if the majority don't vote for it in the city, then they don't have to abide by it. Is that what he's referring to? Secondly, I have to agree with Mr. Hedrick. I have been following this issue for a number of years. I have chastised the board for not unanimously coming up with some option. I myself have been attacked, chastised, and then I have changed people to my thought, and they have agreed that if you take a cut to your carotid artery, and while the medic's treating you says, "Oh my God, I've spotted a skin cancer on your back. Let me release your artery, roll you over, and fix the skin cancer," we don't want that to spread in 10 years. Our biggest issue is the deterioration of our county roads and the exorbitant amount of money that it costs every time it rains as these roads deteriorate into where they need roadbed reconstruction. That must be stopped. My last kind of face-to-face conversation, Mr. Chair, with Commissioner Byerly, he told me I was stubborn. I told him was stubborn. I am willing
You
to
said it
relinquish
first,
my
Mr. Nelson.
stubbornness.
You said it first.
Okay, I'm not chastising Commissioner. I'm going to make a point. I'm running out of time here. I got a lot of pertinent questions. If you want my support, I have
want
questions.
it.
Believe me, you want my support on this issue. I'm not one you want to be against you. Okay, but Commissioner Byerly, I am willing to concede some of my stubbornness. I simply want to stop the financial bleeding that's occurring from the loss of our roadbed structure. That is a very enormous amount of money. Buses might be necessary in the 30-year plan, Mr. Chair, but they're not necessary for what's going to come with the rains every day. So I would like to see the majority of the money placed toward. Secondly, the citizens are going to have to understand, this is
Ms.
a,
Nelson, can I stop you for a second?
Yes.
Do you understand?
Stop him.
Well, it's not working, so it doesn't.
Oh, okay.
But he's going to keep some sort of time. As far as you said about the buses, now there is a different, what, we have control over what the money in the unincorporated area, okay, which was exactly what I was trying to address.
Right.
That our money would go towards fixing the roads in the unincorporated
what I
area.
want is for all the people of Alachua County to stop losing money. They also need to understand that this county charter transportation system surtax is a number, or one of a number of surtaxes the legislature has allowed. This is not the normal sales tax initiative of 3/4 cent. People will not understand that unless you explain it to them. We have an emergency services surtax available. We have other surtaxes. Actually, counties can level taxes up into the 8% range by using these surtaxes in addition to the 3/4 cent local option taxes. So that would still be available. I think the biggest concern in selling this out in the communities, and what I have had experience doing, is people have to understand that these aren't like self-patching tires, these roadways. They won't get better. They only get worse. I no longer want to throw stones at some of you who've been 9 to 11 years on the commission who have passed this down the road, kicked that can down the road. I don't think I'm going to get anybody to step up and repent for doing that. But what I would like to ask you to do is repent by coming together in a cohesive body and let's stop the bleeding from the carotid artery. Then we can fix the other things in the transportation area that we need to do. It's going to be a difficult sell. People aren't going to quite understand this transportation surtax, and they're going to accuse you of using it so that you can pass another tax. Because in the town hall meeting, which occurred 6 months ago or so, that was called in this very room, from both the left and the right, and from almost every citizens of all types, said basically, we don't trust you. We want a narrowly focused, narrowly defined tax initiative in which we don't have to worry about trusting you, that we have control over it. I think that that will be lacking somewhat with this initiative, and it will be based upon faith of the commission as they designate these projects, okay, that the most critical projects, that being the roadway and repaving is to me not the worst, it's the road bed. Once that goes, you're talking about trickling the cost, and that depreciates everybody's property value. It takes away from your future capital that you can spend for some of the programs each and every one of you have differently in love, whether it be Plan East Gainesville, trees, buses, mobile transport, or whatever. You're losing millions of dollars a day. So, Mr. Hedrick, I don't know if you're going to shoot him or anything, but what he's saying is pretty soon we must come together for a cohesive answer to this problem, and then you've got to sell it. And believe me, you want a big mouth with a lot of energy in that area. I don't have a lot left, but I know when my property's decreasing, when the county taxpayers are hurting, and when future budgets will be stressed if you don't do something. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hedrick. Mr. Long?
Well, Mr., I need to reply to a question that was asked specifically of me regarding Mr. Nelson's comments. The question I think I understood was, if the people didn't support the tax, they shouldn't receive any of the benefits. And whether or not the amendment, the charter amendment that was passed by the local municipalities applied in this case. That applies only to charter amendments. This is not a charter amendment, this is a tax initiative. So to me, I was just speaking off the top. To me, it does not apply in this particular case.
Mr. Chair, then I would ask Commissioner Long to clarify, because it's my curiosity. I'm not argumentative with him. He stated that, you know, by taking this option 1 that staff recommends, the county is then the controlling. They're in the driver's seat. That's clear to me. I like that, because when you start getting arguing amongst the municipalities, but he did make a statement. I would like to know, I'm not against his statement. I would just like it clarified so that I can discuss this intelligently with people who aren't always receptive of it, of any new tax. And that is, I think you said, Commissioner Long, that what you liked about option 1 was because if the people in a municipality didn't want to vote for it, well, then good, they didn't need to get anything. Now, I just need to know how I tell people what that meant, and that's the answer I like.
Well, you know, to me, it sounds like political blackmail, and it's to a certain
Well,
degree it may be. But the point is, if you look at the history of sales taxes in Alachua County, is what I'm saying. The small municipalities have not supported these, but when the citizens as a whole voted, they get benefits. So if you don't want to tax yourself, since the county can control pretty much how the money goes, if you don't want to tax yourself, don't worry about it. We'll just take your share of money and give it to somebody who taxed themselves. That's basically what I was suggesting.
Well, good. That's what I did in Newberry last night when they were talking about the fairgrounds issue. I said, remember, you're also citizens of Alachua County, and there is a problem with the proposed new fairgrounds is that it cannot be funded. So if you want to retain your Canterbury, I suggest you work with the county. So thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Yes, sir.
Mr. Chair, I'm Don Ricard. I wasn't here to comment about this, but sitting there, I decided I'm going to comment.
You mean sitting here all day?
Anyway, you know, I don't mind, you know, an extra surcharge, knowing that my money is going to be going for, you know, right things, and it's being sought after to get the right price and stuff. But I was here at the meeting the other night when we were talking about the bike trail. I'm retired. 4 years ago, I have a friend that owns a paving company. He asked me, he said, look, I need you to help me out with some bidding. He taught me how to do it. I did some bidding for the city, county, GRU. And so, you know, I know things have changed in 4 years. So I texted him when I was sitting here the other night. Y'all were talking about $30,000 to do that bike trail, okay? I texted him and I told him the size and everything. He texted me back, he said, $7,800, I can do it. $7,800. Now, why is it he can do it for $7,800 and somebody else has come in there and said it's going to cost $30,000 to do the same thing? Okay? Now, that's why, you know, you guys are up there. You're supposed to be taking care of our monies, but I know you don't. You, like me, up until 4 years ago, I knew nothing about asphalt. Okay, so you don't know what the cost of asphalt, putting it down, this type of thing. You have people supposed to do that. Now, when I went and did bidding, and I spoke to the right people to turn my bids in, instead of me going there not knowing what monies was there for the asphalt work that I was about to bid on, they say, oh, I have this amount of money to pay for that. Okay, that's just like me saying, okay, I want to sell this microphone for $10. Oh, well, I have $100 sitting here for that microphone. You think me as a business person going to turn down $100 when I really only wanted 10? I don't think so. So that to me is a problem. I think more people need to go out there and check out what the bids are. I mean, I saw a bike trail on 53rd of there being done from a company out of Missouri. Why are they coming here? How can they afford to come here, bring their whole crew, all their equipment, and do it cheaper than what local people can do? I don't understand that. You know, so I guess a lot of the local guys know the system, how it works, read the paper, how much money you've got to spend on that project, so they're going to bid it to the highest, because you've got to spend the money, okay? And if you don't, because you lose it, that's just another government thing going on. So anyway, that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Ricard.
Mr. Chair, can I address that issue?
Yeah, Mr. Byerly.
I know staff is putting together a breakout of the costs on that, because again, we all have sticker shock with regard to that project. But
We got it today.
Is it? Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't get it.
It's
Is it
$23,000.
okay, so the number's going down. Still pretty high, but okay. And that, what is that email? Came through our email? Okay.
Some of that was the ballards and stuff like that as well.
Right, because there's more to that project than just pavement. I don't know what all else, but I know that we're going to have the system of ballers to make sure that people don't come through there who aren't supposed to. Is the county proposing to bid that out, or are we going to do that ourselves? Because I thought we had the capacity to do projects like that.
We will do that with our own crews, which probably should bring the cost down.
Further than the 22?
Yes.
Okay, so you're giving us kind of a worst case scenario number.
It's based
Unfortunately,
on-
it's out there now. It's $35,000 we're going to spend on this project.
It's based on quantities from Florida Department of Transportation estimates. And again, if you do bid this out, county dollars, that's what it would take. In terms of you bid this and got the lowest bidder, that's what they would bid.
Okay. I'm going to be very curious to know, once this thing is built, what you actually spent on it. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Ms. Sutton?
Good afternoon, Kara Sutton. I just am trying to obtain some clarification because I've actually heard discussion not just on two different proposed tax options, but possibly a third, but that this charter county transportation system surtax is not a citizens initiative, that there may be that tax out there. So what we'd be looking at is just narrowing down the choices and how to obtain the funding for our infrastructure maintenance and improvements over time. So that we're limiting those options. It's not, it's one tax, and there may be others out there, but there are some similarities to a citizens initiated sales tax. Or surtax.
There was a discussion of a group that was created to apparently discuss this item. And so now, if we pass this, I would imagine that the manager's office will get in contact with that group to have a discussion to see if there can't be a combining of resources to go forward with the same proposal.
Very good. And then just also wanted to clarify that this, the option that staff is recommending is it could have many uses, including multiple modes of transportation, but it is also non-sharing, whereas the infrastructure surtax would be shared amongst other capital projects. Is that correct? So this would help us target
It would be for
road maintenance and
infrastructure
improvement.
surcharge tax. It is definitely has to be shared. There has to be agreements, or it goes to a state forum. With this, I guess theoretically, no, it doesn't. But in reality, I think that it very much has to if we're going to actually get it passed.
So it's sharing amongst multiple modes of transportation, but not amongst other types of capital projects. Is that correct? So
Yes.
we are targeting and improving our infrastructure with regard to transportation.
That's correct.
No matter whatever mode that we take.
That's correct.
Just wanted to make the brief comment. Also, I think Mr. Byerly has pointed out an excellent point in efficiency, that sidewalks should be considered as part of our infrastructure, maintenance and improvements. I know that when I build a house, the cost is less than 0.5% to put a sidewalk on most residential building lots. So keep that in mind, 0.5%. Thank you much.
Thank you, Ms. Sutton. I'm sure that is music to Commissioner Byerly's ears. Okay, anyone else? Okay. Are you a citizen?
Mark
Cold
Sexton,
water.
Alachua County citizen. Just for the sake of pure communications, though, I have to point out that on this list of the breakdown of the price of that bike path, that the asphalt is $1,900, which is cheaper than what the speaker before said. The cost of the asphalt is $1,900. It's the other items that are included in the project that bring the price up.
So,
He was talking about the actual unit
Okay.
cost of,
Commissioner Long, is this all light?
no, this is a new light, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, Commissioner Long and then Commissioner Byerly.
Well,
Then we're going to vote.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we've accomplished what my objective was when I asked that we include this option as another option in terms of our funding our transportation needs. And I appreciate staff's thorough overview and giving us the actual comparisons of the two. I think it kind of helps and it begins that process. And I think Mr. Nelson is right. Mr. Nelson and I, we don't always see things eye to eye. But this is an opportunity for me to say to Mr. Nelson, he's right. And the point that he's right about is you're going to have to be able to educate the public on what this particular, because this is a new tax. This tax was only authorized April of this year. And we will be the first county in the state of Florida if this were to pass, unless some other counties move forward and put this on the ballot before November of 2012. But if we were to pass this, we will be the first to do that. And the only way you'll do that is you must have buy-in from every portion of this community. That's the only way. And you must be able to educate them the difference between this one, the surtax that they have, and a petition, a citizens initiative they can put on the ballot. We must be able to educate that. Now, government's hands are going to be tied. They're tied by Florida statute. You can't spend any money to educate the public on these things that the public need to be educated on. So we're going to have partnerships. And the partnerships are going to have to come from the private sector, those persons who can raise money through political action committees and educate the public. Now, many of us, we're free to go out and talk and, to circles and go out on the stump, and many of us probably will, to educate the people why this particular method is a better method. The reason I support this is because the Florida Association of Counties has been supporting this for years. We finally got this initiative approved this year. And there were two counties that already had this option, that was Duval and Dade County. Now we have, those of us who are charter, we have the same option. The legislature understood the county's needs for transportation, so that's why they gave us this tool in our toolbox. We must take advantage of it. If you read the statute regarding all the uses that it can be used for, it covers every use that we can imagine for transportation. So why wouldn't we use this tool versus the sales surtax? The surtax is limiting. The other thing that's good about this, the county commission, because we are the charter county, by putting this on the ballot, we're in a position to negotiate with other municipalities and other stakeholders about what we believe and how we believe the funds should be spent. So it forces us to sit down and talk with municipalities and other stakeholders about how the use. And the more we buy into the municipalities and the more we buy into the other stakeholders, the more we're going to have a better chance of passing this, especially in this economic climate. Now, it's interesting that Alachua County is probably the only county that's passed initiatives doing downturn in the economies. We've done it. People can't believe we passed wild spaces in public places and the school tax. They can't believe we've done, but we've done that because people understand the needs, and we do a pretty good job of educating. We did the same thing with the courthouse. So I think we need to understand that. And I appreciate, I don't think they're going to actually terminate you, Mr. Director, but I appreciate your candor. I think your candor is needed, and this is a moment of unity. No, we're not going to be lockstep. We're not going to be all, but we need to understand the signal we send will be the signal that people who out there who support all of us individually will take. And if Commissioner so-and-so, my commissioner's against it, I'm against it. And we're everybody's commissioner. But we understand that we need to try to do what's in the best interest of all the people we represent in Alachua County, in every city, including unincorporated Alachua County. So that's why I've always supported this particular initiative, since we just got it, over the 1% surtax. So I'm happy to see we're moving forward. I would hope that we unanimously approve this, and we can nitpick and tear it apart as it comes back to us. But at least let's send a signal today that the county commission is serious about beginning to start taking care of its needs countywide, and hopefully we can get buy-in from others as we go down. So, Mr. Chair, I appreciate the comments from all the citizens who are here today. I really appreciate staff actually giving us an analysis of this, and I would hope that we would support this unanimously. Thank you.
I'm going to ask the maker of the motion to include 2 additional points. Here they are. 1, request that county staff itemize the sidewalk issues for each of the projects on the project list and explain why they aren't recommending sidewalks in the instances where they aren't. This applies only to county-maintained roads, collector or arterial, within the urban cluster. Also provide sidewalk costs as a fraction of the total. That's the first point. You all right with that? Second part is for staff to, in their discussions with the cities, prepare the framework for an interlocal agreement with the municipalities that specifies that county-maintained roads within the urban cluster will be resurfaced or reconstructed in accordance with the Alachua County Corridor Design Manual. So in other words, broach this subject, let them know this is what we want to include. And that's all I'm asking for in the interlocal. It doesn't matter to me what else is in there unless any of you have issues. Okay. Thank you. And then one point that I'd like to make, Mr. Chair. Again, I don't want to be tit for tat. I just want to address the issue, as I've heard it phrased by Mr. Nelson several times, about the comparison to...
you were stubborn?
We don't have any argument about that. I know I'm stubborn, but so are you. Okay, so here's what I wanted to say. Because I think it's important in terms of getting the entire community, or enough of the community, to support this for it to pass, which is why I have a problem with your analogy about surface maintenance of deteriorating asphalt in the county primarily is like the bleeding artery, and everything else is minor surgery. Here, okay, I stand corrected. I thought your point was that maintaining the road infrastructure was the critical crisis bleeding artery type surgery, and that the other stuff like sidewalks is the mole on the back that you want to take off and roll over. Did I not hear you say that?
You've got the gist, but you're misinterpreting what I'm saying. If you do not correct and stop the fissures, bumps, cracks, etc., from attacking the roadbed in a timely manner, you triple the cost of repairs, thus removing the funding for the things that you cherish. And so we need to pick them roads that we can save the roadbeds first. They are critical. And one other thing, ad valorem tax relief. With this new type of surtax, have to tell the citizens, assure them you're not going to be seeking constant ad valorem tax increases, and that about 30% or more of this surtax will be paid from out-of-county sources. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm not at odds with you, Commissioner Byer, really not on this.
Okay,
I want to
well,
stop the loss of millions of dollars as quickly as possible.
And you're articulating what I think has become an article of faith for just about everyone on this board. Since long before you began coming to our meetings, we've understood that point, and they've been working on a maintenance program for a long time. Our staff told us a long time ago about the accelerating cost of repairs if they're neglected. The reason I bring it up is this. You and I may agree that that's the highest priority for the transportation network, but there are a substantial number of people who could not care less about the county's crumbling rural pavement. For a small number of people, it may be less than 5%. Walking around town is a lot more important, or taking the bus is a lot more important. And half the city, half the county, I should say, I want to reiterate this because a credible chance of this passing from the electorate has to take into account half the people in the county won't benefit from the county's rural pavement management because they almost never drive those roads. They drive when
Mr.
they
Nelson,
leave.
we don't want to enter into a dialogue.
No, I'm not.
unless-
I'm saying
unless
in due respect
specific-
of the people
just
don't
expressing my
understand.
point
They
of
think
view.
their roads are, they don't realize what's happening. They see a certain road. They think the county's going to automatically repair it. They don't know the peril, the scope of all this, and educating them will be essential. That's all I'm saying. They don't understand how vast it is.
Right. Thank you.
So to conclude, about half the people really don't care viscerally about that. When they go into the ballot box, people vote their pocketbook, and the only time they get on the roads we're talking about, if they ever do, is usually if they're leaving the county, and then they're usually on a nice state-maintained road. So this problem that we can be fully aware of, but to simply say this is all we're going to do, and to heck with everything else, not even 2 or 3% for sidewalks, when a lot of people, that's the most important thing in the world, in my mind, right out of the gate, ropes off a section of the community and alienates them. So I think we need to take into account the fact that even though the top priority is road pavement maintenance, it's not the only priority. So again, less than 5%, 2, 3%, whatever it turns out to be for sidewalks seems like a very small price to pay and fairly meets the need of the community who are paying the taxes in the first place.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, and with that,
Can we see the
the motion,
motion?
is it possible to put the, okay,
I can see that first. Because one of the questions I do have is, on this motion, in this particular initiative, I guess if you want to call it, is there a maximum amount that could be used on anything other than roads for the multimodal segment of that?
well, the way I'm looking at this,
Well, I'm
Mr.
not,
Bear,
I don't know if that's the way we were looking at it. I just need to know yes or no, or
the
what
answer
is a
will be
percentage?
that we won't know what the final, I don't know that they're doing percentages, but as far as I'm concerned, what the county commission needs to concern itself with is the unincorporated area. And what the individual cities choose to do, because of home rule, and they're supposed to know the needs of their community better than us. Quite frankly, if they want to put more money into the sidewalks and the city of Gainesville wants to spend more on mass transit, that's their prerogative, and we'll see what happens when their people go to vote. As far as the unincorporated area is concerned, I'm very concerned about the roads. And that's going to be my primary focus, and we've heard it reiterated not once but twice that's where the vast majority of all the money that is going to go for the projects in the unincorporated area is going to go towards fixing our roads. So I'm comfortable. I personally am comfortable with that because it sounds like 90% or whatever is going to go towards fixing our roads, which I consider in the unincorporated the biggest issue. What the cities choose to do, and you learn more about home rule and whatnot. That's they ought to be able to determine what they think is
And
right.
is that going to be split out based on population or based on?
It's going to be based upon probably whatever interlocal agreement that we come up with. That is going to, because
It'll be
and
pure negotiations.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if I may on
Yes.
that point. Certainly, I think all of us probably have an idea of how we'd like to see an interlocal negotiated. We've done it several ways. We've done the state formula, which is population. We've done population and roads before. I would hopefully that we'll leave that up to our professionals. If we have a preference, I think we need to let staff probably know. But I think it should be negotiated, and I think each one of the interlocals should be different and should be actually targeted and tailored to their needs in that jurisdiction. 'Cause I don't think the city of Gainesville will be similar to the city of Archer. So I just think we need to leave that flexibility up because you're talking about small dirt rural roads in probably Archer. City of Gainesville may not necessarily want to spend any of this money at all on roads. They want to probably do all capital when it comes to transit. So we just need to leave that flexibility to staff. One size is not going to fit all.
Okay, so the bottom line is for that 1 cent sales tax, the municipalities will have the option to choose, or at least for now, the idea is that the cities and municipalities will decide for themselves based on their commission how they're going to have their portion of that money spent.
Absolutely.
Okay, understood. For the unincorporated areas, in other words, everything that we have authority over, we're going to spend it only, mostly, what is the exact amount on pavement? We don't know yet.
Well,
So I'm gonna
that information.
We'll find out when we pass it. I mean,
No, you heard from yeah, you've
well,
heard from. You've
is
heard
it
from,
is that written somewhere?
Not yet. We've just
We'll
had the
get that.
discussion. We'll get that. But you heard what I heard, that because we have adopted the multimodal transportation fee, that the majority, we're going to utilize whatever money is accumulated through that to handle the multimodal issues, the mass transit issues. What staff has said is they are going to concentrate their efforts of the money generated through this surtax to repairing our roads. And he did put the caveat that there may be something that happens with on 83rd. But 83rd is even a capacity enhancing issue, as I recall. So,
Just a second. Sure. Thank you. Again, Richard Hedrick, Director of Public Works. It's if the funding does end up being, say, 10 years, which is what I've been hearing, whatever, that's a fairly limited time frame. We've given you a pretty extensive project list that well exceeds 10
400
years.
and something projects.
So the time frame itself will pretty much determine what the project list. And then as we identify each project and what would be included in it, whether it's one that we would have sidewalks or bike lanes or which ones it is, that will affect how many of those will be done. But you will have total control over that project list, what the order of priorities are, what the composition of each project is. You'll have that. The only guideline that, again, I reiterate is I think it's really important that the cities are able to add things to the list that they can get excited about and get behind, that they think will make a meaningful difference to them in their community. And that may mean that some communities will get, some projects will be a little bit more than others, but I think it's that give and take process that's going to be really important to develop the support.
And just want to remind everybody, we still have another item to get through. So
then this is just
I just
basically for
have
more
one
information.
Ms. Lopez.
I just have one question.
Okay, what's that? Go ahead.
Can I ask it?
Uh-huh. And your name for the
It's
record.
concerning what you're talking
Name for the
about.
record.
My name is Roberta Lopez, former Commissioner of Archer. I just wanted to ask, are you going to just pave the county roads within the municipalities?
That may happen.
Is
It
that
depends.
what I heard?
That's no. You didn't really hear that level of detail. There may be roads that we might pave.
Will you be able to pave them within the city?
If they're a county road, yes, ma'am.
No, only, that's what I asked. Does it have to be a county road?
Well, yes, for the county share, yes, ma'am. But y'all will have the opportunity through the discussions that we
So
alluded
in
to.
other words, from what I'm hearing, because all of the discussion up here is getting to be really confusing with
I
all the
agree.
different questions.
Mm-hmm.
So all I'm trying to find out is, will we be able to use a certain portion of the funds for county roads that we received and a certain amount for the inner city roads?
The way this will work is we'll, like we did with the other sales tax initiatives where the county staff went out there and said, y'all give us a list of, here's what we think you might receive. What would y'all like to see done with that money? And y'all will provide the list of what actually happens, how that money is spent.
I understand.
So-
And a good example of what I'm talking about, every street in Archer needs asphalt, repaving, resurfacing. Every street. Now, we have very few county roads within the city limits of Archer. You have 241 and the rest of them mostly are just state roads. So I'm trying to see how this is going to benefit Archer.
Archer would get some amount of money to repave the roads that
And also what percent?
that'll be negotiated.
I know.
So.
I must say, though, that the Wild Spaces Public Places funds worked very well in Archer. We supported it. We selected our project, and one of the projects was the Archer Community Center. And I think we received somewhere in the neighborhood of about 100, because we were small.
Right.
And we got just a smaller percentage, but we received about $136,000 towards $1 million project.
So you have a pretty good model to look
So
at.
I understand what you're doing. I'm a former commissioner and a mayor. So I know what you're doing. I'm just trying to see if you want me to take this back to my community, how my community will benefit from this.
You will get some money to pave those roads that you were talking about in Archer that you said all of them
It
need
doesn't
repair.
matter whether it's county or city roads, as long as we specify our projects.
Yes, it
I would hope
will be, we would like you to concentrate on your roads. You know, and we'll concentrate on the roads like 241, as you gave an example. If our staff feels like that needs to be repaved, then that will be one of the projects.
Fine, I think you answered my question, and thank you for giving me the time.
Sure thing. And thank you for everything you're doing in Archer, Ms. Lopez.
So,
Well,
so
Frank?
the next phase of this is basically getting staff to come back with what that unincorporated monies would be going towards.
We would come back with, and probably over a series of several meetings, because I think we're going to have several meetings in terms of what the unincorporated share would be going towards, and setting our own priority list. Well, we've had meetings with the municipality staff, and they'll have the discussions with their commissions to set their list. And at some time, we're going to have to determine what the county commission, based on all this information we get, what the county commission agrees is the appropriate split between the unincorporated government and the municipalities. Because this is different than the other surtax, where you have the ability to make that decision. And part of that will be based on negotiations with the cities, with the various municipalities, what they've represented as their priority needs. And so it'll be several meetings, and all of these decisions will hopefully systematically be brought to the county commission until the full picture is apparent.
Right. Well, for the infrastructure surtax, I was under the impression that that would be mostly for maintenance, for repaving roads. And I thought one of the questions was, would that infrastructure surcharge be able to be used for other things other than roads? Is that true or not true?
The infrastructure surtax can be used for any kind of infrastructure. And one of the issues that always comes up when we talk about going to the voters for that, levying that tax, is all of the other possibilities in terms of what other uses are out there that would be not related to roads at all. And so that's one of the things that we always have to deal with when we talk about the infrastructure surtax. When we talk about
but
the
right
charter.
now, I'm just trying to determine if the infrastructure surtax, if that was just going to be used for pavement/road programs and not for buses.
Okay. Yes.
Mr. Chair, the infrastructure surtax can only be used for capital needs, so it could
What
be
is
used.
a capital? I mean, give me an
Capital could
extent.
be, you could actually buy a bus with it, but you could not hire a bus driver and have them drive it around. So it could go towards transit. There's no, like the bus maintenance facility, those things, it could be used for transit needs. So it's not specifically roads versus transit, but it can't be used for operations and maintenance, and that's the big distinction. Whereas the charter county can be used for operations and maintenance.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Commissioner Delaney?
Mr. Chair, I was just gonna clarify, because I think this all is very confusing for Commissioner Baird. In the past, with just the plain old infrastructure penny surtax, we have to go out and do interlocals because you're stuck in a formula either by population or you negotiate a formula. With this, as I understand, we don't actually have to do that. We're going to do that because we think it's the prudent thing to do, to reach out and find out from all the communities. But in the past, I think there's been an issue if you're getting up close to the election, for example, and not all the cities have signed the interlocals. That would not be a big issue, right? We could still share, but we wouldn't have to have that interlocal as part of moving forward. So there are just some little technical things like that. But to me, it seems like it would be to the advantage of the small municipalities to have their folks involved and to engage in an interlocal, which ensures that they get some share, because part of the way this money flows is it could be us just discussing with the city of Gainesville. Historically, the city of Gainesville has supported the sales tax initiatives. They voted against Amendment 1. I mean, you go back and look, and the small cities have all voted against these kind of initiatives. And so the fact is, if the city of Gainesville comes on board, it's more likely to pass. But I would just say, as a county commissioner, I think it's important that we engage the small municipalities, we find out what their projects are, and even if their citizens don't vote for this, there are local governments and their public works, what little staff they have, are working very hard on dealing with their backlogs as well, and I do think it's appropriate that we have a mechanism in place to share this money.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Any further comments before we vote? Okay. All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Those opposed? The motion is unanimous.